Merci Aimé Martial. Bonjour à tous. Nous allons donc voir maintenant comment 2023 et au-delà s'appuie sur ce projet initial, donc commencé en 2009, tout en bénéficiant des dernières nouveautés en termes de technologie, en termes d'expérience utilisateur, qui ont bien sûr émergé depuis 2009. Et cette mise à jour de la vision est présentée dès 2021 dans le cadre du plan Digital Gabon par l'administration gabonaise et repose sur 3 éléments déterminants. Le premier, c'est la mise à jour du cadre légal pour permettre la création de ce registre biométrique dont nous allons parler, avec des lois sur le numéro d'identité personnelle, sur la cybersécurité de ces solutions et sur l'état civil. Le deuxième point, c'est un choix structurant d'interopérabilité pour permettre la compétitivité des solutions et une parfaite compétition entre les acteurs, avec le choix du standard ouvert OSIA. Et le troisième point, c'est le choix de la co-conception de la solution avec les administrations utilisatrices pour bénéficier à la fois des meilleures technologies qui existent sur le marché, sans pour autant renoncer à un certain niveau de customisation pour répondre aux besoins spécifiques d'un grand nombre d'administrations utilisatrices. Rappelons peut-être que le projet global, l'objectif global de ce projet, c'est de simplifier la vie administrative des Gabonais, c'est-à-dire ce qu'on appelle Citizen to Government Relationship, en s'appuyant sur les bénéfices du numérique et de la biométrie. Et de notre point de vue, Thales, on a besoin de 3 facteurs clés de succès, on va dire, pour un tel projet. Le premier, c'est l'accessibilité des données d'identité par toutes les administrations qui auront vocation à utiliser ce NIP, ce numéro d'identité personnel. Le deuxième principe, c'est l'inclusivité, et ça, c'est la capacité à utiliser différentes modalités, le document d'identité avec la carte, l'identité digitale ou la biométrie. Donc 3 facteurs finalement, et en fonction des besoins des citoyens, la capacité donc à avoir la meilleure inclusivité possible pour bénéficier de ces services. Et le troisième point majeur de notre point de vue, c'est la cybersécurité, puisque bien sûr, ce sont des données qui sont personnelles par nature, et donc l'adoption par les citoyens suppose une parfaite confiance en la cybersécurité de la solution, ce qu'avec notre client, nous avons implémenté dans le cadre de ce projet. Et si l'on regarde un petit peu l'architecture du système, vous voyez ici les bases historiques, vous voyez la photo un peu plus tôt dans les slides d'Aimé Martial, et ce qui est remarquable dans la définition de cette architecture, c'est que dès le début, le Gabon a associé à notre système classique d'élection, l'élection suite, ce NIP, donc le numéro d'identité personnelle, et en créant ce NIP au moment de ce système, eh bien, on peut utiliser notre Identity Management System pour les registres électoraux actuels et à venir, et puis bien sûr pour le registre d'identité. De la même façon, la BIS, c'est-à-dire le cœur biométrique, qui permet aujourd'hui de vérifier qu'une personne égale un voteur, donc l'unicité du voteur, permettra demain de vérifier qu'une personne égale un citoyen. Et on crée là-dessus des API pour permettre d'ajouter des nouveaux services, en commençant bien sûr par la carte d'identité dont parlait tout à l'heure Aimé Martial, mais dans le futur, de nombreux autres services. Et la prochaine étape de cette architecture est de basculer tous les registres papier que vous aviez vus en photo dans ce qu'on appelle ce registre biométrique des personnes physiques, qui s'appuie donc sur le NIP, lequel est créé au moment de l'enrôlement pour le vote. Donc il y a une parfaite complémentarité entre le système de vote et la création de ce registre d'identité. Et plusieurs étapes sont déjà engagées pour aboutir à cette vision globale. L'upgrade du système électoral pour renforcer son lien avec le NIP, et puis pour avancer sur cette APIisation et donc rafraîchir les technologies pour permettre le plus de services possibles. Et donc, dès à présent, au-delà de la carte d'identité, du passeport, des cartes de résident, l'administration gabonaise pense à de nouveaux services, la santé, les pensions, on en parlait hier, et le secteur bancaire, et puis d'autres secteurs privés à venir, pour vraiment faire de ce projet une plateforme de services au service des citoyens. Et les bénéfices sont multiples au fur et à mesure que les services...
And they keep increasing. So for the citizens and for the administration, for citizens first, because it enables them to be automatically added to the electoral register, and also to facilitate their relationship with the administration, and also in terms of material and procedure, and taking into account also the private sector, especially the banks. And for the administration, we also see a number of benefits. We can see the war fight against identity fraud. And the second one is the reduction in costs of doing the census as registers are updated. Now, to look at the legal framework, there is also the financing of this technology, and the government has put in place that will be put in place by the government minister. Now, the three is with this ambitious project, Gabon is showing that it could go into digital transformation without really going back to zero. We are not going to say that we are going to begin from nothing to come with so that we can be digital. No. It was to use what was already had been done, and Gabon also shows us how we can very specifically create an electoral list, conduct a census, from the a platform that also evolves, and also Thales is happy to accompany Gabon in this process, and we thank the Interior Minister for this process, and we are happy to present you our solutions and what we are doing, especially what we are doing with the and also with the Mozip open source. Come to our stand today. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General, and thank you, Mr. Guérémy. Anyone with a question before I take the questions that were sent before?
À bord d'autres questions qu'on a déjà reçues, est-ce qu'il y aurait de questions? Moi, j'ai quelques questions sur le trajet du Gabon. Je vais poser deux.
IBOGA? Was there a board? How did you organize the stakeholders who helped with the legal interoperability and other issues that brought the success to this project? Thank you.
En termes de gouvernance, comme un peu partout ailleurs dans le monde entier, les projets naissent de la volonté.
So the project was actually a government project, and in the IBOGA project, the governance is ensured by a number of administrations.
L'agence numérique, l'Agence nationale des infrastructures numériques et des fréquences, comme bras séculier en matière de développement des logiciels. Donc, il y a eu un comité de pilotage dirigé par le ministère de l'Intérieur et d'autres instances à l'intérieur de ce comité de pilotage qui sont constituées par les différentes administrations qui sont parties prenantes, dont les mairies. Et ensuite, à la fin du projet, normalement, nous attendons l'adoption de la loi sur l'état civil. Lorsque cette loi d'état civil va être adoptée, le projet IBOGA disparaît au profit du Centre national de l'état civil. Merci.
Okay, just one more. Gabon took a multi-sectoral approach. However, how do you mitigate the fear and risk of being vendor locked? Vendor locked means that the technology that you are using, you are locked out of it, you cannot extend it, you cannot change it, and you have high support and maintenance costs.
Comment est-ce que vous assurez que vous n'arrivez à ce point-là?
Je pense que la participation du Gabon à ID4AFRICA nous a fait l'honneur de pouvoir découvrir les différentes opportunités qui s'offrent à nos pays en voie de développement. Donc, nous avons fait le choix raisonné d'adhérer à une initiative d'abord, celle d'OSIA, qui permettait au moins de pouvoir assurer l'interopérabilité du matériel et des logiciels. Et ensuite, nous sommes là en train de voir comment nous allons adhérer à MOSIP également pour pouvoir disposer de fondements aussi de ce mouvement qui peut également être bénéfique pour les États africains. Merci.
The last one. Could you please share with the audience the specifics of the card and explain why Gabon chose a high-end credential as opposed to an entry-level credential?
Plus simple, en carte avec qui avait la puce et pas comme les autres.
La carte à puce, pour nous, est un choix technique et sécuritaire. Parce que aujourd'hui, avec les infrastructures que nous avons acquises dans le cadre du projet, il n'était plus question pour nous de pouvoir prendre des supports papier. Donc, nous avons une PKI nationale, nous avons une PKI passeport. Donc, nous sommes capables, donc, déjà dans le cas des passeports, nous fournissons les certificats électroniques qui permettent de sécuriser la délivrance de ce titre. Et là également, dans le cas de l'identité numérique qui va accompagner le déploiement de la carte nationale d'identité, le choix de la carte à puce était un élément de sécurité en plus parce que déjà nous avons pratiquement tous nos titres qui ont déjà des puces électroniques, donc à savoir le passeport et puis la carte de résident. Voilà.
Thank you for sharing, Gabon. Let me invite the next. I'm pleased to invite the next speaker, who speaks from building a nationwide digital public infrastructure by enabling inclusive ecosystems, India's journey. Please make welcome with me, Suresh, Sethi, the MD and CEO of Protein e-Government Technologies. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk about India's journey in building and public infrastructure, at the foundational layer of which we had the identity, and the conference is all about national identity and how that was created as an inclusive infrastructure to empower billions. So I think a fundamental question which we have been talking about in this entire journey for the last 2 days is, why does a digital ID matter? It enables access to financial services and all government to citizen services. Very importantly, it enables inclusion. And last but not the least, it enhances trust. Trust which is important for usage, for adoption. If you look at global statistics today, there are almost 1 billion people globally who do not have a legally recognized ID. So it's very difficult for them to be able to access any government services. Likewise, today there are 3.4 billion people who cannot use their ID on a digital channel. So they are not digitally inclusive. And 1 in 2 women in low-income countries do not have an ID, leading to critical services exclusion and participation in political and economic life. So as we look at India's journey, I think it's important we talk about before Aadhaar and after Aadhaar. And let me start by calling out the sheer complexity and diversity of India. We are talking about a demographic quotient which was as diverse as possible. We talk about 22 official languages, over 100 active languages in the country. We are talking about 65% of the population living in rural India, with 650,000 villages. And if you look at the sheer geographic scale, and that is where we see the complexity, our second largest state, Maharashtra, is larger than South Africa, to put it in context. Our most populous state, Uttar Pradesh, today is as populous as Nigeria, which is the most populous country in Africa. So putting this context in place, if we look at our scenario in 2010, before the national identity was introduced, we looked at 1.24 billion people not having a digital identity. 60% of these people did not have an ID. There were only 17% people with a bank account. And this was 63 years after independence. In terms of rural banking penetration, there were 100,000 branches serving 650,000 villages. And the average distance to a bank branch or outlet was over 10 kilometers. So that was the state of the population in terms of accessibility. There were fragmented social welfare schemes. More importantly, ghost beneficiaries existed, and there was rampant leakage in subsidies, with almost 40% getting skimmed off before they reached the ultimate beneficiary. The cost of KYC, again critical to observe that why were we not able to take banking to the masses? The cost of KYC was almost $12. As per BIS data at that point of time, it was estimated that India would take almost 5 decades to reach a banking penetration of 80%. So if you look at it, it all converges into 3 neat buckets: the challenges around accessibility, affordability, and awareness. At a holistic level, banking could not reach the masses. The physical distance, the cost of onboarding, the fragmented distribution just did not make it possible. Affordability was a challenge, both for the people consuming financial services and for the banking ecosystem to put out an infrastructure out there. And awareness. Very importantly, financial literacy was still a big, big challenge. And the biggest challenge underlying all of this was the ability to identify oneself. So what did this lead us to? So the transformation started with the National Identity Program. It was very important that the solution was inclusive. It was inclusive, essential that any DID solution should not widen the digital divide. Because at that point of time, while 63% of the people used phones, only 3% had smartphones. And 37% of the people were without a mobile device. So it became critical to see that we have an inclusive architecture of the program we built. And this was initiated through our digital identity program in 2009 with an aim to cover 1.29 billion citizens with a 65% rural base and spread out to 640,000 villages. I think the mantra clearly was simplicity. Simplicity of idea to be able to uniquely identify yourself, simplicity of enrollment, and I'll talk about it, minimal data requirement, and simplicity of usage, paperless, anytime, anywhere. So what were the 2 things that were very critical to create a virtuous cycle? It was about guaranteeing availability, and that is about being inclusive, and it was about fostering demand, creating an ecosystem for adoption and usage. So when we look at guaranteeing availability, I think the 3 critical parts were the underlying operating model, ensuring that it was interoperable, and providing a regulatory framework which supported the entire ecosystem of usage. When we look at the operating model, it was a centralized model with government being the sole issuer of identity with a federated distribution network for enrollment. There was minimalistic data, just 4 data points in biometric, because the more data we were seeking from the people, the difficult it was that they would join. The onboarding process was intuitive and straightforward, and it was designed for inclusion. It was addressing the people with and without mobile devices to be part of the ecosystem. Interoperability being critical, as we talked today, it was built on an open ecosystem on top of standard APIs, and it was participative and open in nature. So it allowed public-private partnership, incentivizing them to provide more services and provide more use cases for people to use the framework. The regulatory framework becomes the fundamental foundation on which all this is built. And I think in our case, the government went a step ahead. They not just provided an enabling regulatory framework, they were also able to press public sector institutions with large distribution network to be part of this journey. One sterling example was India Post. We have a postal network today which has almost 300,000 postal workers who effectively reach every household on almost a daily basis. By a simple act of parliament and differentiated regulatory guidelines, the entire postal network was converted into a bank, which meant that each and every postman was a mobile banking unit just by providing them with a smartphone and a biometric device, and they could reach any household and service a person with a biometric identity to access their bank account, to withdraw cash, to transfer money. This one single act allowed the government to scale up the rural banking infrastructure by almost 2.5 times. Likewise, when we talk about fostering demand, it became equally important to say, how do we deliver value through multiple touch points? Bank account opening and mobile connection were 2 simple use cases which were introduced, and that really provided the change that we were about to see. So building atop a digital identity layer, it was simple. Identity was which proved who I am. What I do was what was brought about by the payments architecture built on top of it. These were the foundational DPIs which got created. And data was what I have, which meant what money, what digital assets, what transaction records I have, and how do I use them. So this led us to a unique outcome where 1.36 billion unique digital IDs were issued. And we were able to see that there were usage across multiple use cases for people to access financial services, to access and be a part of the formal financial economy. 14 billion transactions, eKYC transactions were done to open bank accounts. We had 19 billion digital authentications. And at any point of time today, there are 20 billion transactions happening every day using the digital identity to access financial services. In terms of banked population, we moved from under 20% to 80% banked population in a matter of 7 years. So what was proposed or forecasted to be a 50-year event was able to be achieved in 7 years. In terms of mobile penetration, 1 billion mobile connections were provided, 800 million internet users, and mobile data cost in India today effectively is 33 times lower than the US. So I think these were the key enablers which really changed the ecosystem and brought about adoption. If we look at how 1 billion lives got impacted, we are talking about the journey of IDs. And very clearly, we saw in 7 years, we achieved 99.9% saturation. Similarly was the case of mobile penetration. Today, when we look at the numbers out there, we are talking about almost 829 million smartphone users out there, with 30 to 40% accessing financial services using the device. The per capita internet data consumption moved from 2 to 14 GB in a matter of 7 years. The other big seminal change was the digital payments and the adoption of the same. Real-time payments, we are talking about almost 284 million digital transactions now happening in a day. And our payment architecture, or the payment settlement system, today allows for almost 8 billion transactions happening in a month, which was a big change towards enabling adoption and usage of the system. As far as direct benefit transfers are concerned, this was another important aspect where you could actually transfer subsidy directly into the accounts of the final beneficiaries. There was an estimated saving of almost $34 billion, and $228 million of direct transfers were sent in the year 22-23. This was, again, the same infrastructure which was used during COVID, where the government could efficiently transfer almost $4.5 billion worth of support to 160 million beneficiaries in a matter of hours and months. As we look forward, we are now talking about 17 transformational stacks, which have been launched since 2010. These are working across multiple areas, be it digital identity, transactions, assets, and open digital ecosystems. And today we are seeing DPGs getting built on the back of the existing digital public infrastructure to unlock value across diverse sectors, be it health, be it logistics, education, mobility. And putting it simply, it talks about creation of new value of USD 500 billion and maybe a $200 billion savings to the country. And if I convert it into tangible benefits on the ground, it talks about 1 to 3 years increase in life expectancy, 50 to 25 million student dropouts expected to stay in school, 100 plus hours expected to be saved per person during the year due to smart mobility solutions, a 1.5 increase in expected farmer income. So this is going to be a key differentiator as we go forward in diverse sectors for the country. As an organization, we have been an e-governance partner to the government. We've participated in multiple projects ranging from taxation to social security to digital identity. And we are working today to create open digital ecosystems in the area of health, agriculture, and taxation. Last but not the least, I would conclude by saying that in more ways than one, Africa shares India's complexity and diversity. The sheer geographic scale, the presence of digital haves and have-nots, demographic diversity, a range of literacy levels, both financial and digital. India stands ready to share its DPI experiences for empowering the people across the world. Thank you.
There are many questions in the crowd. Can we have, by show of hands, any questions? The story of India is a success of 1.4 billion. That's bigger than Africa's population. And now 80% are banked. Any questions from the congregation? There is one at the back. Can I have a microphone right at the back?
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'd like to ask, what key ICT infrastructure made this journey a success? And also, what were the challenges faced along the journey? Thank you.
I think at the heart of it was the foundational ID, which was Aadhaar, what is also known as, which is the Hindi word for foundation. The foundational ID infrastructure was built on an open stack with minimal information being sought, and that became the foundational DPI on which we built all our use cases, and all our e-governance services were then provided for access to the common beneficiaries. Some of the challenges in the journey clearly were from the sheer scale. People dispersed all over the country, people with limited identity. How do you convert them and how do you issue an identity to them? I think these were some of the challenges which clearly were part of the journey. How do you simplify the experience? As I spoke about the fact that the decision to take minimal information to create a unique ID per person was a seminal change which came right at the beginning in terms of the principle. Data and privacy were a very critical component as we built it, because that is what was going to enable trust. So biometric deduplication and data security in central servers became a very, very critical component of the architecture. And the use cases which actually allowed public and private participation using open source technology and APIs were really the success factor which determined and defined the adoption which happened subsequently.
Thank you, Protein. Change is growth. One last question. How was India able to address the digital divide, 22 languages, and driver use trust to increase adoption and inclusion?
Thanks for the question. I think critical to India was, as we said right at the outset, the design principles ensured that the digital divide was not widened. Because if we look at sheerly the availability of devices in the hands of the beneficiaries or the citizens, we were actually looking at population in 2010 which was split three ways. We had people with smartphones, with feature phones, and no phones. Today, actually, the entire design of the architecture, one, supports anybody with no device to be able to use their biometric identity to be able to access services. So your financial or your digital ID was effectively your biometric. And that was a very critical choice made at the time of designing the infrastructure. The other thing which we've seen play out well is creating an assisted model. I spoke about financial literacy. Even in the example of India Post, when we converted the postal ecosystem into a banking institution to enable the last mile citizen, we almost spent 1 billion man-hours of training in order to impart financial literacy to the postal worker, who in turn was able to educate the masses to become part of the formal financial economy. So I think addressing digital divide becomes critical, and assisted services and the design of the digital public infrastructure play a key role over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you for causing Africa to reimagine herself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Please give it up for India. Thank you. Our next speaker is going to talk about finding the right solution for mobile identity. And he's giving us insights from United States and Canada. Please make welcome Mark Sullivan, Digital Identity Architect from the Canadian Bank. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Mark Sullivan, and I'm the Digital Identity Architect for the Canadian Banknote Company. In that role, I really wear two hats. The first is acting as the subject matter expert on digital identity standards, models, and technologies. And the second hat I wear is more operational. So I manage the Digital Services Group, which is a development group responsible for building out our digital identity solutions and doing program designs with our customers. So why are we here today? We're all at various stages of our digital identity journey, I think. Some of you are just learning some of the technologies and methods for the first time. Others have advanced production implementations in place. Ourselves, we've been busy for the last 18 months working with the state of Virginia in the United States and building their mobile identity program. So a bit later in the talk, I'll be sharing some insights on that. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about mobile identity and mobile credentials and sort of explain why I'm so excited about them and the value that there is there, and also stress the importance of standards. Any sort of work that you're doing in this space, in the digital identity space, there's lots of benefits to having a standards-based approach, so I'd like to review that as well. So this slide here is a lot to look at, but breaking it down, this is a bit of the history of how we've arrived at mobile credentials sort of being the predominant form of digital identity arising in North America. If you think of it from the user's perspective, I'm sure all of us here have gone to a website before, entered our personal information, and created a username and password. That's fine, right? You do that once, and you don't really know where your information goes. You're not really sure what the security is behind that data that's being stored. But then you go to another website and you do it again and again and again. And what you're doing here is you're actually creating these identity silos of information where your personal data sits behind all these different services. They all have a copy of it, and that just creates a lot of different attack vectors where people can go in and get your information, right? And that's where you get all these data breaches and things like that coming from. But above all that, which annoys us the most is the user experience there. You know, the recommendation is to use a different website or a different password for each website and every account you have, and you know, that's not a lot of fun. The internet and technology companies tried to tackle that, particularly tackle that user experience problem by creating identity provider models. So this is your login with Google, login with Facebook, you know, those big login screens with a million icons on them now. And there is still a big problem with that. Now that you're, you know, trusting your data with Google or Facebook or whoever it might be, sure, the security might be better behind those systems, but you've given up so much in terms of your privacy and your control of your data. When you go and you do one of those login operations, you really don't know if whoever's attesting to your identity is tracking your activity, what they're doing with that information, and really, you don't really have any control over what information that they're really disclosing behind the scenes. If you think of governments doing centralized verification, it's much the same as well, right? You sort of begin that process and give permission for the government to go and provide that information to a verifier. But at the end of the day, you don't really know what's been transferred and you don't really know how far that disclosure has gone. One of the great things now is the advancement into the space of identity wallets. So much like today, when you want to prove your identity to someone, you might pull out a physical card and hand it to someone. They don't typically go and you know, call the issuing authority and say, is this a real card? Is this real data or not? They just sort of take a look and make an assessment based on that. The digital identity wallet now actually lets you engage in transactions digitally the same way that that model in real life works, where we can actually just provide that information directly to the person that wants to verify it. There's all kinds of additional great digital checks that can occur, so you're not relying on, you know, human interpretation of that physical card. But at the end of the day, they're just making that assessment digitally in place, perhaps using an online method of transfer, but oftentimes just using an offline Bluetooth connection or something of that nature. And you know, that really improves the privacy of your transactions because you are only providing that information and you are only having a communication with that one party that you intend to talk to. The other thing I want to sort of touch on here is, you know, the concept of smart cards and EID cards, and you know, they're great. They serve a strong purpose, but they've largely been skipped over in the North American market, and that's for a couple reasons. First and foremost, putting a chip on a card naturally is going to increase the price of that product, right? So when you're doing these things at large scale, that's a lot of money that's going into it. And while they do add the ability to do some digital verification with a scan and do some security checks and things of that nature, they are rather static by nature. You know, when you issue this card, it's, you know, could be on a 5-10 year life cycle, and really the functionality and capabilities of those cards are pretty locked in. And that's where we sort of move into the space of mobile credentials. In geographies that have, you know, the smartphone penetration to support it, you really sort of get the best of both worlds. So now you can leverage the ability to use that identity wallet and have those peer-to-peer trusted connections. But at the same time, you as the issuing authority have the ability to add new functions and capability into those credentials, issue new credentials to those users. The users themselves get more control over privacy and data disclosure, where, you know, when you want to actually engage with a verifier, you can select particular items from your identity information that you want to disclose. So it really becomes greatly privacy enhancing as well, and a better experience for both issuers and the users of the system. Touching on the importance of standards now, so I've been appointed by the Standards Council of Canada to sit in the International Standards Organization, so I've had a first-hand look at the due diligence and the development that goes into standards that get widely adopted today. And there's lots of benefits for them. First and foremost is just, it's going to save you time if you pick up a standard rather than trying to sit down and design something yourself. And with that, these standards that are being developed and that are being published and out there and openly used, they've been vetted by security and privacy experts to such an extent that it's going to be very hard to replicate that level of security on your own implementation. Maybe you have the greatest development and security teams in the world, and that's not a problem, but at the very least, that design work going in behind that objective you're trying to achieve, you can borrow that from the open standards community, and that's why we're working so hard to push these standards out and make them available to you. The other great advantage to using standards is you're setting yourself up for interoperability. You're not the only people doing something one certain way, and all the standards I'm going to talk about on the next slide here, they're all on everybody's radar, right? We are trying to work really hard to make sure that whatever mobile credential standard you might choose to pick up and use, it's going to be compatible with different wallets, and it's going to be compatible for different use cases and across digital identity ecosystems in the future. For those of you that were able to hear Gail Hodges talk about the work OpenID is doing, those are great resources to look into sort of the future of where all this is going in terms of interoperability. And then, finally, another note on the standards is even if you've started your program already, you might be rather advanced, you've done something proprietary, that's fine. Just keep tuned into the standards community, find out where you can leverage it, especially if you're looking at building future roadmap items. Again, you're just going to save yourselves headaches down the road. So in North America, there's 3 models that are really tracking right now. The first is the mobile driver's license. This started out, over 10 years ago now, so it's new to a lot of us in this room, but the standards organization has been working on this for a while. One of the big notes on the mobile driver's license standard is, back in 2012, 2013, when this was envisioned, the purpose of it really was to replicate the physical driver's license experience of handing it over the counter. So the published version of the standard out there today is really intended for those in-person use cases. But of course now we're looking at the advantages of leveraging mobile credentials for online service delivery and the like. So there is an upcoming version, an update to that standard coming out that's going to let you use your mobile phone to log into websites and access government services and things of that nature as well. The second one I've listed there is the digital travel credential. So if the MDL was intended for driver's licenses, the digital travel credential is that for the passport. So that's coming out of ICAO, the same folks behind the e-passport standards and structure. So they're looking to allow you to use your mobile phone for international travel. And then the third one there, it's been a popular topic the last 2 days, is decentralized identity, or the world of verifiable credentials. These are very, very powerful frameworks to build elaborate open ecosystems where potentially anyone can sign on to be an issuer and give someone else some authentic data that can be verified. It's being driven by open standards communities, but it is a very, very complex space. You will spend a lot of time looking into it and investigating it, but if you are looking for a broad government digital infrastructure, a lot of the answers that you're looking through when you're trying to identify, oh geez, I wonder if our program can do that, the answer is probably yes in the decentralized world. So as we heard yesterday, there's a lot of momentum here, and we're going to be hearing more about this in the months and years to come, but it is a very exciting development. I do want to talk about key program considerations. For those of you that haven't really started out on your digital identity journey, I might have led you down a path now where you're jumping and saying, oh great, I'll pick a standard and away I go. It's not quite that easy. There's so much that goes into a digital identity program. I've just listed a couple of the considerations here that we've run into developing that mobile identity program in the United States. And what's really interesting about this is that left-hand column there that says MDL standard, those are the only components that we actually got by choosing the MDL standard to represent our driver's license digitally. Everything else on the other side, there's plenty of other standards out there that cover bits and pieces of that. For example, provisioning that credential onto the phone. There's an ISO standard that can help you with that. But some of the items there are just things you're going to have to design on your own. They're governance and policy decisions. They're driven by your existing architecture and how your existing lifecycle management might work. And to that end, I'll talk about a couple of the decisions we had to make on the Virginia program. First of all, enrollment. So we sort of sat down first of all and said, well, how are people going to actually go about and get their digital credential? 18 months ago, still in the throes of COVID, there's a huge push to keep people out of the offices if they don't have to be there, right? So we really focused on the remote enrollment workflow. It's really quick. You can enroll with your driver's license card in about 2 minutes after you've downloaded the app. And if you stop by the CBN booth in the main exhibit hall, we actually have a demonstration of that, and I'd be happy to talk you through it. The second one there is provisioning. So during the provisioning process, provisioning is you've accepted that this person is eligible for the mobile ID. Let's actually get it there on their phone. The manner in which you actually provide that credential onto the phone and bind it to that device, there's some help there in the MDL standard for that, but we also had to layer on additional layers of security there to make sure that, even if a device is lost or compromised, that actual digital license is never going to be able to be used by another piece of hardware. The third one there is the life cycle and the automated management. So we also made a conscious decision working with our partner state that we didn't want their operators to have to undergo new training. Just because someone comes in and says, I lost my license, I don't want them. So we went through and designed our product to really bolt onto their existing business processes. So as we launch today, there's no additional operator training, nothing else we have to go into every office, teach everybody about, teach them a new software platform. We've twinned it up with their physical card credential and their existing business processes. And these are all things that you can plan out ahead of time. Finally, some lessons from the program that I haven't touched on yet. Usability design is really big. I do want to make the point that usability design doesn't just start when you start writing the software. Go out and engage with your users, users, both the people that are going to hold and present these cards, but also the verifying community. You're going to learn a lot about how this stuff will work in the field, and if you build that into your program, you're going to see a great boon to adoption when you launch. And another thing is identity is very personal, right? We all kind of have this problem where when you go out and talk about a digital identity program, people are immediately sort of worried that, oh, I'm going to put my personal information on the phone, what's happening with it? Although digital identity and these user interfaces are relatively new, that problem actually isn't. So what we did is we took our UX and UI designers and we went back and engaged with people in the mobile banking industry, for example, in e-commerce. These people have fought those problems before, right? Putting your banking information on your phone. So go and learn the lessons that they had when rolling out. And again, we had a lot of talk on communications yesterday, so I won't spend much time on it, but you can't overstate the importance of communicating effectively to your eventual users as you roll out these programs. And with that, I'll turn it over to some questions.
It's really fast. Mobility, interoperability, security. Any questions from the congregation?
Hello. Good afternoon. My name's Andy Smith from CETA, Border Management Solutions. Mark, loved your presentation. I share your excitement about digital identity. However, smartphone adoption in Africa is really quite low at the moment. I know there are plans to increase that over the coming months and years. But what would your recommendation be to nations to get on the digital identity journey when they don't have access to smartphones at the moment? What would you recommend as the first steps?
Sure. I think one thing that's important to stress, sort of in that communication category, is very often these programs with mobile credentials, they're optional, right? And that should be a huge part of your communication strategy, just the optionality of it. But with that, in terms of geographies that might not have the same smartphone penetration, if this is useful to enough of the population, it still might be worth investing in as those numbers continue to grow. For those without it, there are sort of intermediary options, right? You can do printed credentials and things of that sort on a card. You can do a smart card in addition to a program like this. You're going to have a really hard time meeting that same level of functionality that you might have in the mobile credential, so you need to be cognizant that you might be creating these different service tiers depending on how you're rolling that out. But by and large, it is accepted that this presentation is focused on the lessons from North America where we don't face those problems. So, it is a tough problem to crack, and it's really, you really have to examine it on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis, I think.
Another question? I have one of my own, but can I have one more from you? Okay, Mark. Where can we learn more about mobile identity?
Great question. I think, first of all, you're all here, and that's a great first step, right? So stay connected to this community. I've been a part of it for a while now, and it's excellent. It's right on top of the latest trends, and you're getting the latest information. This push into Decentralized identity is a big topic, so that's great. I'd also encourage you again to come visit our CBN booth on the exhibit floor, and I'd be happy to share additional links and resources with you there, as well as take you through that mobile identity presentation. Other groups, OpenID, Trust Over IP Foundation, I mean, there's numerous sources out there you could look at.
How is interoperability being achieved with mobile driver licenses?
Right, so mobile driver's licenses, again, are based on that international standard. So that standard actually outlines how you can create interoperability across jurisdictions by creating a public key depository, much like we see in the e-passport world, right? So in the United States and Canada, the Motor Vehicle Administrators Association, which is made up of all the different DMVs that are the issuers of these MDLs, they've gotten together and they've actually created what's called the Digital Trust Service. It's a public key depository, much like the e-passport world, and issuing authorities, when they bring these programs online, go through a vetting process, send those keys in, and then verifiers have a one-stop shop to get the keys they need, so you can get that uniform interoperability across jurisdictions.
What do we do with the cost of PKI that is quite expensive in Africa?
Yeah, I don't think that's exclusively an Africa problem, right? When AMVA was looking at how they were going to build their PKI, they asked the question too on how this will get funded. There's a lot of different models out there, and this again might fall down to a jurisdictional basis on how you want to tackle this. If you can collectively, if Africa can get together and form a PKI, then that's great, right? Because you can all use that, and that's going to help the collaboration and the interoperability going forward. But there is certainly some investment. There's different models that we could talk through, probably not in enough time today. But whether it's a user-based fee or a verifier-based fee, or if it's just something that's offered as a public good.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Please give it up for Mark. He has emphasized interoperability, highlighted standards, and taught us more of carrying our identity in a mobile manner. Our next guest is Guérémy Springal. He's going to talk about the digital transformation of borders and travel. Please make welcome the Senior President, Sethi, at Borders. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, as was just said, I'm going to talk about the future of borders and really looking at the digital transformation of borders and also the digital transformation of how we travel. Before I start, I don't know how many of you are aware of Sethi, so I've just got one quick slide on Sethi itself. Sethi is the IT provider to the air transport industry. We were formed over 70 years ago by the aviation industry itself. We're owned by the airlines around the world, including Kenya Airways, and we provide a wide range of services across aviation. We serve airlines, airports, but very critically governments as well, because aviation doesn't work unless we have effective borders and we're able to manage the travel across borders. I manage the border management business, and we work with over 80 governments around the world, many of which are in Africa. And as you can see on the map, we're really global. We've got over 40 locations in Africa itself, and we provide a wide range of different services to governments. What I'd like to start with is really looking at the future of travel. And we envisage a world with secure, safe, and seamless travel. And that digital travel vision is something that the industry has been talking about for a very long time, that governments have been talking about for a very long time, and is now beginning to hit us today. So I'd like you to imagine a world where you can travel from anywhere to everywhere without ever needing a physical travel document. A world where borders are frictionless, so you can literally step across the border on your arrival. And where every step in your journey, whether that's by air, land, or sea, is seamless and using digital technology. The key enabler for this is really at the border. And therefore, it's important to understand some of the challenges that governments face at the border itself. And if you consider really the primary role of the Border Management Agency and governments at the border, it's around two things, and it's about balancing those two things. First of all, it's about how do you protect your national borders? And there's lots of different threats out there. Unfortunately, the threat from terrorism hasn't gone away. There are over 5,000 terrorist attacks around the world in 2021. And whilst globally that's actually been reducing over the last few years, in Africa, in certain parts of Africa, we're seeing an increase in that sort of activity. So it remains the primary purpose of a lot of governments at the border. There are many other potential threats as well. We've got the threat from trafficking, in particular human trafficking, which remains and is a big growing issue around the world. We have a whole host of other types of international crime, and there are a lot of geopolitical instabilities. Clearly, in Africa, we have the crisis in Sudan that's been evolving, and that doesn't just impact Sudan, that particular country. It impacts all of their neighboring countries as refugees look for, movement out of the country. And clearly, the impact from health pandemics is also very much a big concern for governments around the world. We're hopefully coming out of the COVID pandemic, but the World Health Organization have identified 8 further priority diseases that could become the next pandemic. So we really need a way of managing our borders and protecting them, not just from security threats, but equally from health threats. The other key role of the border is around national prosperity. How do we open up our borders to promote trade and tourism into our countries? So we've got this real key balance we need to be able to manage. And tourism is a really key focus for many governments. So in Africa, there's over 7% of gross domestic product in Africa related to tourism. And clearly trade's been discussed a lot, particularly with the African Continental Free Trade Zone, how we can really enable that free movement of trade around Africa to really grow the economy and grow national prosperity. So there's a number of things there we really do need to be focused on. The way to get and achieve that balance between protecting your borders and in creating prosperity is really about digital identities and digital transformation of your border. And if you look at the key elements of that digital transformation, it starts with the seamless journey. It starts with the ability to be able to travel as an individual or for goods to seamlessly travel across borders. And the only way to really achieve that is through digital pre-clearance, really understanding who is it that is traveling into your country in advance of their journey and being able to pre-clear them ready for that travel. Now, digital pre-clearance has been around for many years. CETA developed the first digital pre-clearance solution over 25 years ago in Australia. In Africa itself, we delivered the digital pre-clearance solution for South Africa in readiness for the 2010 World Cup. And so a lot of this technology has been around for many years, but we've now got to a point where the adoption of the technology should be looked at across all countries around who can benefit from this. There are 4 other parts of the digital border that you also need to consider. The first is around the dynamic border. Pre-COVID, if I take you back a few years, pre-COVID, border rules very rarely changed, maybe once or twice a year. So my ability to travel into a country very rarely changed. During COVID, we were changing our border rules multiple times a week, to be able to manage the threat that the pandemic was presenting us. So we're moving towards a dynamic border, one that can change in real time based on real-time events. And that's going to be absolutely critical in the future. Borders of the future also need to be integrated. And we discussed about that a bit yesterday. different government departments need to work together. So immigration, customs, police, health authorities, agriculture, they need a common view of the passenger and be able to make an informed decision about whether they can enter your country or not. We also need to make use of traveller data, and advanced passenger information is really critical to that, and the quality of that data is absolutely critical. And that will enable us to move to more advanced risk assessment techniques to really understand the threat that an individual or goods might be presenting at our border. And finally, and clearly a big focus of this conference, is around digital identities. How do we utilize digital identities to better to trust and be able to verify individuals before they even step close to your border? As my co-presenter from Kenyan Banknote presented, the primary credential for that in terms of a digital identity is defined by ICAO, and we're looking at the introduction of the digital travel credential for international travel. In effect, it's a digital version of your passport, and it's available now. So the specification for that was defined by ICAO over the last couple of years. There's 3 types of DTC. The first type is available now, and it's a user-created digital travel credential. So the user can extract information from the chip on a digital passport or the information on the passport page to create a digital version of that passport on your phone. And that includes the biometric capability that's embedded into your passport. There's also other types of digital identities that could be used for more regional travel. So maybe a regional digital identity could be used in that way. You need to be able to, though, link that digital identity with the individual. And the way the aviation industry and the travel industry is really going is around the use of biometrics. And again, that's been discussed. CETA does a number of surveys each year, and our most recent survey identified that 7 out of every 10 passengers is very comfortable using their biometric to travel if it's going to make their journey easier. So we know that travellers are very happy using that. And globally, over half of all airports around the world are expecting now to biometrically enable every point in the airport process by 2025. So this is happening now around the world, and therefore you really need to think about this as part of your managing your borders. So how does this work? So first of all, we need to create that digital travel credential. As I said, you can use your passport to do this onto your mobile device and be able to read the chip using an NFC, verify the individual through a liveness detection by taking a selfie as well. And that information at the point of registration is verified against the ICAO PKD in the same way a digital passport is today. Having created it, you can then submit your digital credential as part of an authority to enter into a country. So if you're applying for an e-visa to enter into Kenya, in future, you'd be able to submit a digital version of your passport along with that e-visa application. So the government doesn't just have some basic information, they have the full information, including your biometric readiness in advance of travel. That can then be verified at the point of check-in using systems like advanced passenger processing, which enables a real-time check of that passenger at check-in and enables you as the government to deny boarding of that passenger if they don't meet the criteria and they don't have the authority to travel. The traveller, though, needs to be in control. Data privacy is really key, and therefore we very much promote decentralised identities as well. And I'll come on to a use case in a minute, a case study where we've delivered the ICAO DTC in conjunction with a decentralised verifiable credential. And that enables the passenger, the traveller, to select who they wish to share that identity with. So they can select to share it with the airport if they wanted airline access, or they want to be able to just drop off their bag and do a self-bag drop. They can choose to do that, share their identity with the airline. Or indeed, when you arrive at the destination, how can you just share your identity to attend an event, a World Cup, or enter your hotel? And because your information is on there, we can make that very specific to that use case. So the case study I was going to use, and there's very few implementations of digital travel credentials today. The one we're most proud to be involved in at this moment in time is the island of Aruba in the Caribbean. So a country that is very focused on tourism, wants to obviously protect their economy, protect their border, but equally they want to make it easier for people to travel into their country. So we've implemented a digital travel credential trial with Aruba. As I said, we've linked that with a verifiable decentralized identity. So it's standards-based, using open standards related to that travel, and very much following the same process that I've just taken you through in terms of the ability for the passenger, the traveler, to select who they wish to share that information with. So in Aruba, we actually originally started during COVID, and we were able to share COVID health credentials with the government in advance of travel. So every traveller who took part in the trial was able to submit that in advance, submit their digital travel credential, submit their health credential, and be able to access the country in a very seamless way. One final slide for me just to wrap up. There's obviously a lot that we need to do to achieve some very big things for our industry and for our countries. First of all, I would very much suggest you really start focusing on how do you plan for that digital border of the future. There is a lot of change going on globally. There's a lot of opportunity for Africa to actually overcome some of the legacy infrastructure that other countries have got by moving to more digital technologies faster. What I would also suggest is very strong collaboration between governments and the travel industry. So we work very closely, as I said, with airlines, but equally hotel groups and other travel organizations, cruise companies. You know, we're not just talking about aviation here, we're talking about land borders and sea borders as well. So how do we create that collaboration? And finally, it's about be involved yourself in helping define how the future of digital travel is going to evolve. So work with us to help define some of these evolving standards that are going to be so important to our industry. Thank you very much. If you would like to see any of the things that I've just presented to you, please come to our stand. You can see actually a demonstration of how that Aruba solution works, the creation of a digital travel credential, and using verifiable credentials. Thank you very much.
Before you vanish across the border, we have a couple of questions. How do we, any question from the congregation? I have one across there.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Pam Dixon, World Privacy Forum. Quick question for you. So in regards to sharing this travel data, passport data, with third parties that are unrelated to travel, such as shops, stadiums, etc., that does introduce some additional framework requirements. What do you envision as a policy framework that would govern such data disclosures, considering that this would happen largely in international areas where national governance would not apply? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, very good question. And clearly data privacy and other security concerns as we adopt digital identities is going to be really important. So the focus here is really about making sure that when you're defining those policies around the use of digital travel credentials or any other sort of digital identity, is making sure that those use cases are fully understood and defined within those sort of policy areas. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, if we are going to allow you to use a digital travel credential to access a World Cup stadium, and we've done something very similar recently in Qatar, then that particular use case needs to be well thought out to make sure that, again, you're only sharing information that is required for that purpose. You're not sharing the whole of your passport. You're not sharing necessarily all of your biometric data. It depends on what that use case is. And that's going to be really key when you think through your policy around introducing digital identities.
2 questions. Africa has natural disasters, war, and people fleeing for their lives. How do you see this with digital borders? And also, which area would you recommend governments implement first in their digital transformation journey?
Yeah. I think clearly, you know, when we do have a natural disaster or a regional conflict where individuals need to flee an area very quickly, quite often they're not going to be able to flee with all of their identity documents. They're unfortunately going to be traveling without that sort of capability. So ICAO have thought about that as within the standards. One of the standards is the Type 3 DTC, and that enables a digital identity to exist without a physical travel document. The other forms, they always recommend to keep your passport with you when you travel. Don't rely on that digital identity. But the Type 3 is one where agencies, the United Nations, could issue a United Nations citizen passport, you know, without needing that necessary identity. So we need to obviously prove the individual is who they are, need to be linked to their biometric or other data. But there are opportunities to use that digital identity technology when you have got those situations.
2 last questions. How quickly do you see us adopting or getting rid of our passports? And secondly, what are the major challenges facing the implementation of digital borders?
Okay, so I think we're going to be on a journey for many years. I think the Type 1 DTC is available now. We're doing trials around the world, and if your government is very much looking towards doing a trial around digital travel and digital travel credentials, we're very happy to discuss how that can work. The Type 3 DTC is probably many years away, and that's the ability to be able to securely, very trustworthy travel without needing to carry your passport. I think we're probably a decade away, but who knows? Technology evolves at a big pace. In terms of some of the challenges you're going to face, I think clearly here in Africa, one of the big discussions we always have with governments is around funding. It's around the infrastructure. I think one of the questions earlier was around the use of mobile phones when large parts of the population don't have smartphones. So that funding and infrastructure is key. And the other piece that I would always say is really consider, you know, what the regulations and the policies need to look like. Sometimes the technology is easy to deliver. It's much harder to actually implement that within your regulations and your policies around how you actually govern your country. So those are 2 big things I would mention.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last exciting discussion of today's session is on an emerging and frightening technology, exciting artificial intelligence. Our next speaker will talk about AI-powered or artificial intelligence-powered trust identity ecosystem. Please make welcome Shin-Bon Lu, the General Manager of International Business Unit, MTech. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm standing between lunch and you. So I'll try to keep it short and interesting for everybody so that you won't be hungry and you can go for lunch, all right? Wonderful arrangement from the organizer to put me standing in front of your lunch, all right? Okay. So it's a frightening technology, but at the same time, I think it's something is inevitable in the sense that when you talk about AI, today you talk about ChatGPT, you have Bing, but so how can we use AI today to help in terms of developing a trusted identity ecosystem? I think what is important to understand today is how can AI help us? Today, I mean, I'm from Singapore, and strange enough, a lot of my son's homework now is done on ChatGPT. No, he comes home, he comes back home, and he says, "Daddy, I don't understand this." He said, "Okay, I can't answer this question, I need to do the research." 2 minutes later, he goes to the computer, turns on a ChatGPT, he said, "Daddy, that's the answer that is generated." So AI is not exactly frightening, but it's something that can help us. So today, we talk about AI. How can AI help us to automate registration? That's one. Two, AI enable us to learn what is important in terms when it comes to a trusted eco-identity system. And of course, AI can always provide a better user experience. 2 days ago when I was entering the Kenya borders, I was asked to put my fingerprint on the reader. So I was a midnight flight, I didn't sleep well, 3 a.m. in the morning. I lifted my left hand onto the reader, and the immigration was looking at me and said, "Excuse me, right hand." And strangely enough, I was still putting on my left hand on the reader. So with AI, such things could have avoided because the AI would have guided me through some form of an intelligence response to say that, "Hey guy, idiot, wake up, it's your right hand, it's not your left." So AI would be, it's interesting, so this is something that we can do. Next, the key benefits of AI. One is, of course, to reduce fraud. It learns throughout the entire process. It enables scalability, that's for sure. We look at enhancing the privacy and security with AI now. And of course, what is important is looking at increasing accessibility. Now, the key pain points of Africa today. Number one, when everybody bonds into this world, you are a subscriber of Mother Earth, which means that every one of us automatically subscribes to this world. So there's no reason why you need to be excluded. It's just like a mobile phone today. If you don't subscribe to a mobile network, you are disconnected. But for us, everybody in Mother Earth, we are sharing the same world. When you are born into this world, you are automatically subscribed into this world. So one, identity registration. It's a big word, but I like to use a simplified term, and that's called subscribing to Mother Nature. Number two, identity proving. How do you prove yourself that you are a subscriber? Number three, identity authentication. How do you, besides proving it, you need to authenticate what it's really, you are who you are. And last but not least, identity management, right? With such a vast database, 6 billion people in the world, how do we want to manage this identity? Okay, I'll go through one of this one by one very quickly. Biometric identification with AI. Number one, it helps us to, I will skip to this slide. For those who have come to our booth at MTech, we have realized today that in the enrollment process, we have developed an AI program that automatically removes the background from the picture that is taken. Today, in Africa, you have a very challenging terrain. You have little villages that are spread across the region. So how do you, and it will be a problem to carry a white background, blue background, yellow background, whatever background that you need. So with AI, we have cleverly devised a software or a platform that will remove the background automatically once the picture is taken. So I think this is important in what I mentioned, improving the security, improving efficiency, and improving accuracy. Proving. How do you prove yourself? All right, again, we always adopt a multimodal identity proving. Besides your face, you can look at your fingerprints, you can look at your biomet, your iris, or you can look at your face, all right? So this is called a multimodal identity proving. Authentication, this is more interesting. How do you prevent deepfakes? The Russians have developed this. I think in those who are aware, there is this particular software that you take, and then it can sort of like predict how you will look like in 50 years. Not a very popular software with the ladies, I know, but I think for the guys, not very popular with guys as well. I did it, and I don't like it how I look like 50 years later. But no, the AI is going to be able to help identify and authenticate such a technology today. Again, using a biometric, blockchains, whatever that we have today, with the power of AI, we are able to develop a platform that will definitely enable you to authenticate the person that you are looking at. Management. Okay, I will zero in on the border control on this particular identity management. Again, when you cross the borders, you know when the immigration officer is taking your passport and looking at it this way, you think he's looking at your passport, but he's actually looking at the line, probably 20 people down the line or 10 people down the line. He's looking at a person who is doing this, or feeling extremely uncomfortable queuing up to cross the border. And that is the person that I'm going to zero on him. Because he is uncomfortable going through the border in a queue because he has something to hide. And that is human nature. So with AI, with the platform that we have developed, it is able to clear the people whom have nothing to hide, who are really coming to the country either to enjoy themselves or to create some trade and business or to even create employment for the country. So I will clear them very quickly, but when it comes to that person, that's aha. I'm going to look at the passport, I'm going to use the AI behind this to make sure that the passport is a real passport and you are the real person, and I'm going to authenticate you. So this is how AI would be able to improve, or even for the entire identity management. All right? The future of trusted identity. I love this slide. I mean, I'm from the era of Star Wars. Anybody from era of Star Wars? This is episode 4, A New Hope, which is why we are here today. No, Africa is a new hope for you, for identity, ID4AFRICA. This is where we are today. This scene was why I put this slide. It's a very interesting slide. Reason being because, as the caption says, was it really Princess Leia? Obviously, George Lucas, when he shot the movie, we don't have all this authentication, proving, and they actually believe that she needs help. But what if it's a fake? So this is something which I think it will get us thinking today. What will happen in the future on how we communicate? In fact, a lot of movies are talking about, holographic thing. There are few cameras, you can communicate, it looks very real. But how can I identify that you are the real person? Who is the real Chin Boon that is speaking to you now? Could it be a fake? I don't know. Again, I say this is one of the very good examples to say that, no, in the future, what's going to happen? So again, looking at the future, we have decentralized identification, again using AI. We have blockchain. And last but not least, we have an AI identity system which will enable you to power yourself in terms of how to combine each and every business biometric model that we have in order to identify a person that you are who you are. What is important today with AI is actually combination of different biometric model. Number 2, AI is able to learn and to give a response to fight either what Sethi has mentioned, human trafficking. Number 2, illegal controls, or even terrorists in the country. All right, again, just now as mentioned, digital human. Are we able to develop an AI that is able to identify a digital human when you are speaking to? So this is something, again, a development for the future. It's going to be very interesting. Again, 2 words about where I come from. I work for MTech. It's a listed company. We have over 2 billion documents issued using our systems. We issue one of the largest passports that's been issued in the world, China. So I would like to encourage all of you to visit our booth at H202 to experience for yourself how can you subscribe to Mother Earth, identify yourself, prove yourself, and authenticate yourself. All right, again, all work but no play makes John a very dull boy. Again, when you come to our booth, enjoy the entire subscription process, and you will be rewarded with a lucky draw on the last day. Come and experience the entire subscription process or registration process. All right, with that, I thank you for ID4 for giving me the opportunity. I would like to now take any questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
You have 4 minutes between you and lunch. Can I have one question, and then I'll take some questions with him? Just anyone with a question? Thank you very much. I have a couple.
Sure.
Shinbon, how shall I be able to compete with my AI identity and my real identity in the next few years?
Let's put it this way. You are not competing with an AI identity. The AI is just simply helping you to ease the process of identifying who you are. You are not competing with AI, which I think there's a lot of misconception today that, a lot of jobs will be taken away by AI. There will be a lot of things that's removed. AI is taking over our lives. I don't think we should go in that particular direction with regards to AI. I think we should look at AI with the regards of they are the ones who will be helping us to improve our lives. They will probably take away some of the very mundane jobs. Put it this way. I think my colleagues here who are in the government, every day you look at trying to identify or say that, okay, when you apply for a passport, is this person a real citizen or a fake citizen? Put it this way. If you have AI systems that already developed and is put in the background, these jobs can be taken away by AI, and the real human eventually will then focus on looking at real cases, problematic cases, or cases which needs to be verified. So this is not a competition of AI and me. It's really how to use AI to enhance and make our life and the entire process a lot more efficient.
Thank you, Shinbon. 2 more questions. How will AI help fight fraud?
That's a very good question. Again, AI, as I mentioned, you have deep fakes today. You have it's really looking at faking something that is so real that it could take as a person. So again, with AI, you will have all your, you have your authentication. It learns throughout the entire process to say, okay, it's very, very different today when you say there's a general response, where you come from. There is always standard questions that your immigration officer will ask. But with AI, he will generate questions. If you find that this fella has some deep fakes or whatever, he's looking at, okay, how do I generate a question that he will not be able to answer? Because deep fakes eventually are still robots. So I mean, for AI, number one, basically it's able to detect liveliness. So this is very important to detect liveliness, which today is already in place. But what is important is to generate questions that is out of the context of the person who is trying to be a deepfake.
So how does AI help in the efficiency of self-enrollment?
All right, again, self-enrollment, come and experience it yourself. Again, I gave a very good example. For an idiot like me, a left hand and a right hand, I couldn't tell the difference. So with AI, it will prompt the user to say, so there will be cameras and training to say, okay, you are lifting your right hand. I want your left hand. There could be a graphical user interface or whatever to say that lift your left hand and not your right. So this will then enhance not only a user experience. It will improve the efficiency because it will then create a lot faster in terms of the registration, authentication, and of course, proving of the form. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So from artificial intelligence to digital travel credentials to mobile identities, the journey of Gabon and India, let us give a hand clap to our speakers. The journey for identification authorities gets more complex and more exciting. I call you and your attention to emerging technologies as you step out for lunch. Thank you very much for your attention. We look forward to seeing you this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Let's just get some. I just want to give the afternoon's program. Oh, patience too. Thank you very much for attending to us. We look forward to a better Africa with digital identity.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please, we have an important announcement to make. And this concerns our headsets. S'il vous plaît, veuillez bien déposer les écouteurs sur vos sièges. Ces écouteurs appartiennent à une structure et pas à ID4AFRICA, s'il vous plaît. Deuxièmement, pour le gala de ce soir, the gala tonight, remember to look at the back. Flip over your badges. If you find this sticker, remember that at 7 p.m. tonight, you should be present at the Boma Hotel for the State Gala. Number 3, we resume at 3 p.m. À 15 heures exactement, nous allons nous retrouver dans cette salle. Maintenant, à vous d'aller vous ressourcer. Enjoy your meal, bon appétit. Please remember to keep the headsets on your seats. They do not belong to ID4AFRICA, but to your company. So, thank you. 7 p.m. tonight, remember, 7:30 at the Boma Hotel for the State Gala. Headsets on your seats, please do not take them away. And 3 p.m. on the dot, we start on time so we can end on time. Thank you. 15 heures, aujourd'hui, nous nous retrouvons. Remember what Dr. Atik spoke about yesterday. Come find out what's special about the session this afternoon.
Africa, oh.